Big-time mergers and acquisitions, shifting priorities in venture capital, and the thus far fizzled Ring of Fire project. North and South Canadian mining and mineral exploration employs thousands in this province. Here to bring us up to date on the major stories of the day, Brian Milner, freelance business and economics writer and a contributor to the Globe and Mail, and business journalist for Bloomberg News. There's Danielle Bokov, who also covers metals, mining, and commodities, and it's great to have you here.
Thank you very much.
You I've seen before. It's not that I'm not happy to have you back, but it's your first time, right?
It is, but I've seen him before as well.
It's soon going to be baseball season, though.
I know, isn't that wonderful?
Yes.
You want to talk baseball or mining?
Let's talk mining.
Mining, oh, okay. Bokov says we got to cover mining, so here we go. Actually, let's get right down to this, because two of the biggest players in the business that you cover, Newmont and Barrick, are having heavy-duty negotiations right now about who's going to take over who and what's going to happen. Do you want to just sort of, why don't you do a mining 101 on this and really lay out who the two players are and why this is so significant?
Right. So Barrick and Newmont are the first and second largest gold producers in the world. Barrick was the largest until 2018 when Newmont just sort of crept ahead. And they are rivals, but they've also been joint venture partners in a number of areas around the world. They've come together almost a few times to merge, but never pulled it off. The most recent time they came close was back in 2014. And now it looks as though something is going to happen again, but there's a few pieces that are kind of on the table. Barrick has made a hostile bid for Newmont. Newmont has its own merger it is trying to get off the ground with Goldcorp, which is another Canadian company. And then the third thing is in the mix is this possibility that they kind of go for something friendly instead, which is some sort of a joint venture in Nevada around Barrick and Newmont assets, because they have adjoining assets there.
Why does it matter who takes over whom?
Well, it matters in terms of size, because the bigger you are in the mining game, the lower your costs, the easier it is to get capital, and the more access to the resource you have without expending a great deal more money. So financially, it makes sense to get bigger, and that's why they keep trying to do this. In the case of Barrick and Newmont, they've been at each other's throats for more than 20 years. I mean, they are combatants for that #1 ranking, and they always have been for a long time. And the fact is that Newmont has had a huge advantage over Barrick in the last few years, because Barrick accumulated tons of debt to become the world's biggest gold miner. Newmont has been better managed and has had better luck with a lot of its assets. Barrick, as we know, has had some disasters in South America. They've had taken a lot of risks in other difficult places to get those assets. They overpaid for a huge asset that they had to basically write off. They screwed up their hedging strategies, which we could talk about.
That goes back a ways.
Long ways, yes, in my time. But the one thing about Barrick that we should emphasize is that when Peter Monk built and ran Barrick, he was a Canadian nationalist. And I still remember him coming to an editorial board meeting at the Globe and Mail back in 2006 when he was trying to take over Placer Dome, another huge Canadian gold miner. But Newmont and others wanted Placer Dome too. And he said, we cannot allow this asset to fall into foreign hands, because then the head office will disappear and we'll lose valuable Canadian jobs. And Canada can't afford to have these things happen to it. And he was even going to try and get Ottawa to block a foreign intervention in that merger. But of course, he really wanted it for himself. Then in 2014, when they went after Newmont, and Peter Monk was still alive at that point, he would not do a deal that would allow Newmont to move the head office to Colorado.
Well, that's the thing, right, Danielle? I mean, presumably, if you're a Canadian nationalist, you're cheering for Barrick to take over Newmont because then head office stays in Canada?
I think it's almost a moot point at this point. So if Barrick takes over Newmont, one of the main reasons this will happen will be to get synergies in Nevada, because they have these adjoining mines there. It's really hard to imagine that the entire center of gravity doesn't shift to Nevada. Maybe technically the headquarters would stay in Canada. It would still be based in Toronto. But Mark Bristow, who runs Barrick now, really hates large corporate head offices. I've interviewed him a number of times, and he's been very clear that he thinks that he needs to get his people on the ground, on site. So I think there are all kinds of reasons that you might assume that if this goes through, that the head office would shift to Nevada, although they haven't said that. And if Newmont gets its way, if it wards this off and ends up merging with Goldcorp, they're going to have a regional office in Vancouver, but definitely the head office will be in Colorado. So either way, I think in that sense, it's a done deal.
Well, because you've heard the comparisons made to the steel industry of the 1990s, where offshore companies took over some of the biggest names, Algoma, Stelco, so on, Dofasco, in Canada, and we have, I mean, the plants are still there, they're still making steel some of the time, most of the time, but it's been described as a hollowed out business now.
Yeah, I mean, there are some differences, right? Mark Bristow, as an outsider, I guess, doesn't understand. He actually has called it the hysteria around this whole hollowing out argument. But one of the big differences is that certainly in the case of Barrick, they have one mine in Canada. All of their assets are outside of the country. So, you know, there is a certain logic, even though it may hurt as a patriot, there is a certain logic to saying, why do you have your headquarters necessarily in a country when all of the assets are offshore?
Well, she also mentioned that, you know, Barrick did its own takeover and ended up bringing the executives from the company it took over, including
Mark
Bristow, to run the company. And they don't have any connection to Canada. I mean, they're based in the Channel Islands. He's mostly in London, right, most of the time.
I think he lives on a plane, as does John Thornton, Barrick's executive chairman,
and John
right?
Thornton, who's an American, right?
He's an American. Graham Shuttleworth, the CFO, is not based in Canada, and Mark Bristow is South African.
So that's already happened to Barrick. I don't think it would have happened if Peter Monk was still around, but it did happen. And it's not just that we lose head offices. We also lose all the finance, the accounting, the legal services, all the stuff built around those head offices. And that's been very valuable for the Canadian economy over many years. And those jobs are disappearing too.
So in your view, it does matter who takes over whom from the standpoint of certainly head office and corporate jobs in Toronto.
Oh, it does.
It does. Okay. Let's check this out. We seem to have a bit of a conflicted relationship as it relates to the world that you cover. On the one hand, we want to be environmentally sensitive. We want to take Aboriginal, Indigenous rights into account when we're dealing with extracting stuff out of the ground. On the other hand, we have these resources in the ground, and a lot of people think we'd be economically foolish, if not stupid, not to try to exploit them if we can. Let's discuss this a bit, okay? Do you have a view on how we ought to be handling that conundrum?
I mean, I think my view is probably shaped very much by the geography I live in, which is I'm from Southern Ontario. One of the things that has really struck me since covering mining is that when you go to mining communities, people have a completely, sounds banal, but different perspective on it. So you go to these little mining towns and the schools, the hospitals, the roads, everything has been built by the mining companies. Often you've got 3 generations in a family and they've all worked for mining companies. And they're communities that are outdoorsy. So there's kind of a love of nature and a love of environment, but also it's a different approach to the environment. It's more like the environment is something, extracting natural resources is something that sustains you literally, right, economically. And it's actually kind of interesting. I'm reading this book right now called A Shepherd's Life. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's by this shepherd who, in Britain, whose family has worked in the Lake District for hundreds of years. And he talks about the way that you view environmental resources when they're part of your livelihood versus kind of the tourists from the south who go up and go, oh, this is very pretty. And I think that really kind of summed up for me the difference in the way of viewing it across Canada.
What's your take, Brian?
Well, I think I pretty much agree that the view of the resource industry is different when you live in resource communities, and your livelihoods depend on it, and they become pretty good livelihoods. Unlike the exploitative days of the late 1800s and early 1900s, even into the 1950s, when miners didn't have any say over their working conditions, when unions were still weak. Today, mines in Canada, at least, are pretty well run and pretty safely run, and they're getting better at the environmental side. I think we can say that, not in all cases, but as we know, they're making a lot of commitments to improving environmental performance. They're dealing a lot better with the Aboriginal groups that own that land or used to own it. They're employing a lot more women and Aboriginals in their operations. And the money for working in those companies is pretty good. I mean, the average wages now are up in the level of toward $100,000 a year, which you cannot get in manufacturing or some of the other businesses that these people could be doing. So for these communities in places like Sudbury and Timmins and others, I mean, these resources represent a level of prosperity they wouldn't have otherwise.
PDAC's in town now, right? Like prospectors and developers. And I remember going down to, the conference last year and going this year as well. But I heard last year that they think that they are this close to zero emission mining, which is astonishing if you think about it. Mining where you don't pollute. That's fiction where I would have thought, but they say no, it's coming.
Mining companies are digitizing. There's all kinds of technology around tailings, which is obviously waste storage, which is hugely topical right now because of the massive spill that we just saw in Brazil. Close to 300 people are assumed dead from that one. The issue with all of that, though, is cost, right? So, I mean, it comes back to that idea or that spectrum, I think, of where you sit. At the extreme end, if you're a CEO and your priority is shareholders, I mean, you could be a bit cynical and you could say the argument is really just about getting the resource out of the ground at the greatest profit. Then at the other end of the spectrum, you might be from an Indigenous community that says, no, the environmental cost is so high, leave it in the ground. And I think most Canadians are somewhere on the spectrum in between, right? The spectrum, if you sit in Calgary, is going to be different probably than if you sit in Toronto. And that's really what we're wrestling with right now, and especially in the wake of some of the disasters that we've seen, like the Valley spill.
We're going to talk about that in a second, but I guess I should follow up with this. You know, I think it's fair to say that back in the day, a lot of people saw mining jobs as sort of really good paying jobs, dangerous jobs, but jobs that didn't require a lot of formal education, very much like auto worker jobs. You know, you could come right out of high school and get a great job in the mines and make a great living, and there you go. How accurate is that statement today?
Well, as I said earlier, I think today the money's better. The jobs are safer. There are a lot fewer of them. But there are other jobs related to mining that are very valuable, technology jobs, the things that Danielle was talking about, the digitization of these operations. There are AI jobs that are just devoted to mining. Geoscientist jobs that are really important and very high paying. And there are a lot more jobs now for women than there were before because they no longer have to go in and take big heavy picks and slam at walls.
They might not even necessarily have to be in the field, right? There are more jobs that can be remote.
And they can do them by computer, and they can do much better analysis of locations where they're looking for valuable minerals, and they can save a lot of money and time using automated techniques to do that. There's one mine in Ontario coming on stream that'll be the first all-electric vehicle mine in Northern Ontario, which is pretty cool. They won't use any more diesel in any of these vehicles that are underground. So that's a big breakthrough. So those things are happening.
Let's pick up now on the Vale story that you just talked about. Brazil, a mining dam collapsed last month, hundreds of people dead. I think there's still many more people missing and unaccounted for. Why do these kinds of catastrophic accidents in the 21st century still happen?
I mean, we don't have enough detail on that one specifically, but what I can tell you in broad strokes is that in a lot of ways, mining has not changed in 100 years. And probably the most ubiquitous type of waste storage is the kind of traditional upstream tailings dams. We don't have good data on how many there are around the world. Clearly there are thousands, but we don't know how many thousand. Some of them are closed. Some of them are being regulated by governments. There's a lot of sort of missing information. And I guess, ultimately what the industry is wrestling with is how safe is safe. And a lot of people see this as a real turning point I mean, the ICMM major CEOs from major mining companies, a week or two ago, got together and said that they're going to allow independent oversight. They're going to create a body to oversee the industry as a result of this.
The CEO of the company has resigned. The general manager of the project has resigned, and it's very clear in Brazil there was faulty regulation and terrible supervision and terrible inspections, and the inspectors filed reports that it turned out weren't accurate. So the problem is that if you don't have strong regulatory discipline and a government that cares about it, or if there's corruption involved, as we've seen in some of these cases, then these disasters happen. We've had huge disasters in India where people are mining illegally. They're going in and mining for coal, but they don't have a license to do it. So they're doing it because they either do that or they starve. Well, there's no regulations covering those mines. There's no safety at all. And so they have disaster after disaster.
And there are certain things they know, right? They know that generally speaking, the wetter the waste storage is, the more dangerous it is, because if it spills, it flows, it covers more ground. They know that you shouldn't have people in the path. So you don't you shouldn't ideally have your tailings dams, right near a village. Right. And yet things like this keep happening.
Let's talk about some Canadian mining companies that are involved in some of these things. There's a developing country such as Guatemala where there are actions happening, and as a result, the court system is the focus of some nasty stuff going on right now. Take us through some of those cases. What should we be looking for there, Brian?
Well, it's interesting in Guatemala because the courts have actually suspended operations at a mine, which is very unusual in these countries for a court to actually act that way, because often they side with the mining company, which is supported by the government, and against the people, especially in this case, it's an indigenous group of people. The other interesting part of this is that if you don't get satisfaction in the court systems in these places, in Latin America or Africa, you can now take your case to Canada. And that's going to become a trend. If a Canadian company is doing things that they wouldn't be able to do in this country, and they're doing it there, and the courts aren't doing anything about it, or the government is ignoring it, they can now bring their case here, and that is starting to happen. And that's going to, I think, be a sea change in the way US, Canadian, and European mining companies deal with these cases.
Any case in particular that's caught your eye, Danielle?
I mean, I think you're probably referencing the Tahoe situation in Guatemala, right?
Yep.
Would be one. But no, I mean, a lot of companies have run into various environmental issues. Sometimes, there's no teeth on the government side either. One of the ones that I followed quite closely was Freeport-McMoRan in Indonesia. So as they were renegotiating their long-term right to operate there, one of the things that came up was the fact that since they set up that mine more than 20 years ago, the way it was built was to put the waste right into the river system. So, and it's a massive mine. You can see it basically from space. It's this huge gouge in Papua province. And in the midst of those negotiations, the government looked as though they were going to put their foot down and say, right, this is not going to this can't happen anymore. You've got to change the way you do it. And they ended up sort of settling for something that was really basically grandfathering the old technique. There was very little significant change. It didn't have a major effect on shareholders. But there's this whole kind of movement right now to sort of resource nationalism, and a lot of governments around the world are trying to get more taxation and more of a stake out of their mines, and the environment can sometimes be used as leverage in that.
Yeah. Let's put a new issue on the table here. The intersection of mining and cannabis. You did a piece on that. What's that all about?
A lot of miners are smoking up these days.
You don't say.
It's a hard life.
Well, the piece I did was basically about the fact that because cannabis is the hot new thing, it's attracting all the speculative money in the market that traditionally, and especially in Canada, used to go to junior mining companies, junior exploration companies, because some promoter would come along and say, I've got this terrific gold find in northern British Columbia, jump in now, and they used to call these penny dreadful stocks. You'd go in and 99% of the time you'd lose your money. The promoter would walk off with a bundle, but every once in a while there would be an actual huge strike. People like Robert Gottlieb became billionaires, but they started as small promoters doing these things. And so you take your chances. And there used to be this joke that as long as you had enough Belgian dentists investing, you could finance a mine development. Last year, the big thing was cryptocurrencies. Everybody had to have Bitcoin and some of these other things. So mining companies that went to look for this kind of speculative money weren't getting it, not as much as they used to. This year, it's all cannabis all the time. And that takes away money that a lot of sort of iffy, bottom-rung junior explorers would count on to put together a mining plan and maybe go out and find something. The good side of all that speculative money leaving is that it leaves the serious players going after their own capital in better ways instead of competing with a lot of junky companies for money.
Another issue, access to capital. More difficult these days for miners?
Definitely.
How come?
Especially for smaller companies. So, if we circle right back to the beginning, the generalist investors have pretty much fled the space. So this is one of the things that's at stake with the Barrick-Newmont battle, is the largest gold company in the world is probably going to be the one that gets most of that generalist interest. And then you go to the other end of the chain and you have these small players that, as Brian said, are really scrambling for capital. I think it's a bad thing because if you look at most large mining companies, there are a lot of people that think that the people that find gold best are the small players. They're nimble, they're cheap, and that has really fed these larger companies all the way along the line, but they need access to capital, and it's been terrible right now. It's not just the fact that the money's gone to blockchain and cannabis, it's that the market has been bad. And that there's just been a lot of fear around the sector, and as I say, the generalists have really pulled out.
And the implications of this being what?
Well, I mean, if you don't have a robust pipeline of junior exploration companies, then you have diminishing production, and that's something all the large players are wrestling with right now. It's one of the reasons that they're looking to consolidate or to merge, is they're looking forward, and there's this expression, peak gold in the industry, which we've probably already passed, right? Which means the world has probably already produced the maximum amount of gold per year that it will. And so now it's like you have to run faster and faster just to stay still.
Just to tread water.
Yeah.
In our last minute here, Brian, we've talked about access to capital, we've talked about zero-emission mining, we've talked about increasing automation in mining, remote mining. What are some other trends that you might be having your eye on these days that you think, boy, that's neat and that's new? Well,
it sounds sort of Star Trek-y, but this whole interest in going to places like Mars is mining related. Space mining.
There's also deep sea mining.
And deep sea mining, which is even more viable, right? I mean, that's already happening. That could certainly change the face of the industry.
What could go wrong is what I think. Yeah. Sea mining, right?
Nothing, I'm sure.
Yeah. But nevertheless, as the technology improves and the ability to get minerals in these hard-to-get places out of hard-to-find rocks, it will make it much more interesting, especially in the area of rare minerals, because they're rare and they're concentrated in some bad places like the Congo. Well, if you find some of those same traces on other planets or undersea, it could really change the whole dynamics of the industry.
Fascinating. Danielle and Brian, thanks so much for this look inside mining, mineral exploration, commodities, the whole 9 yards. Thanks a lot.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.